Hey guys, Ronnie here for the question of the week. This week's question is going to concern something that's a little controversial when it comes to bearded dragons, and that is it okay to feed mealworms? Oftentimes you'll go on forums and people will give you absolute rules. You absolutely can't do this or you absolutely can't do that. And the thing that's funny about that, especially for us, is to hear people tell us that we can't do what we have been doing successfully for many, many years. And feeding mealworms is one of those things. Now, for those of you guys who have watched our video on common bearded dragon care mistakes that we put out last year, you'll note that we did say that we recommend the use of mealworms as a part of a bearded dragon's diet. Some people mistook what we said as if we were saying that you should only use mealworms in your bearded dragon's diet. That is absolutely the furthest thing from what we hope that you understood. What we were basically saying was this: as a part of a varied diet, mealworms should not be avoided. Mealworms are very easy to acquire, they're very easy to breed, they can be stored readily in a refrigerator. Mealworms are very easy and very convenient, and for that reason they should be included. However, just because some people have raised bearded dragons to sexual maturity using only mealworms, we don't believe that that is the healthiest way to go. We simply believe that mealworms should be utilized as a part of a varied diet so that your bearded dragons are getting the necessary protein, carbohydrates, and yes, even fats. One of the things that people say immediately when they're talking about mealworms is, well, you guys recommend it, but on a reptile forum, everybody there said, oh, it's a bad idea. After hearing some of the controversy between this video and our care video on this, I've actually contacted some bearded dragon breeders throughout the country and asked them the same thing. Do you guys use mealworms? Every single one of the bearded dragon breeders, now mind you, we didn't contact every bearded dragon breeder out there, but every single one of the ones that we contacted told us that yes, they do use mealworms as a part of their bearded dragon's diet. It's not to ask, what does someone on a reptile forum that has one bearded dragon, what do they recommend? The question should be, what does the vast majority of professional reptile breeders whose living depends on us producing nice, healthy animals, what do we recommend? Always consider the source of your information. I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. About a month ago, I received a message through Facebook from a young lady who said, I can't believe you guys feed mealworms to your bearded dragons. That is horrible. You guys are horrible keepers. You guys shouldn't even be on Facebook or YouTube or yada, yada, yada. So I messaged her back and said, why would you say that? I mean, what do you have against mealworms? She said, oh, they're horrible. They'll kill your dragon. They cause impaction. They're too fatty, and all of these things that are commonly said on these reptile forums. And then she began to tell me how she had 10 years of experience as a bearded dragon breeder and how she knew far more than anything that I had ever put out in a video. Now, 10 years as a bearded dragon breeder would have been impressive, except for the fact that this young lady was only 15 years old. That means that she wants me to believe that she started breeding bearded dragons when she was 5 years old, and over the last 10 years she's gained more experience than myself or many other professional breeders have in the decades that we've been doing this. So consider the source. A lot of what's put out there on these Facebook groups and Facebook messages are usually from someone who's kept one bearded dragon their entire life, and they Googled some information and suddenly they're a herpetologist. So if you want to know what needs to be done, talk to the experts and stay off of some of the Facebook forums. You're going to get a lot of mixed opinions on a lot of issues, this being just one of them. As we're talking about mealworms, there is one thing that I do want to caution you about. This is not only true about mealworms, it's also true about roaches and crickets, but especially about mealworms. You see, bearded dragons can easily gorge themselves on mealworms. It's a little more difficult for them to do it with crickets and roaches, simply because crickets are fast, roaches are fast. The bearded dragon has to put forth a lot of effort to get enough food to actually gorge themselves. Mealworms, though, are a little bit different in that usually we feed them in a cup. The mealworms are stationary for the most part. They're not going anywhere, and so they're easy pickings for the dragon that can just continually eat and continually eat until they gorge themselves. What usually happens is the keeper goes in the cage after a bearded dragon's been allowed to gorge himself and finds undigested mealworm parts all over the cage. They assume that the dragon had difficulty digesting the mealworms, when actually what happened is what we call the supermodel syndrome, where the dragon just eats and eats and eats and then throws it all back up. If you have any questions, refer to our video on how many prey items should you be feeding at a time. That'll give you a little bit of direction on that matter. Also, we want to talk about the size of the prey. One other question we get asked sometimes is, my bearded dragon's back legs are just almost paralyzed. They don't move, and I don't know what happened. Can you give us some help? And usually the first thing I ask the person is, how big is your dragon? How big are your insects? And usually what I'll find is someone will be feeding full-grown adult mealworms or full-grown superworms, or sometimes even full-grown adult crickets to a baby bearded dragon. That pressure inside the body will cause the back legs to stiffen, and there will be a temporary paralysis. Usually it is only temporary. I've never seen it last. Once the dragon either digests or regurgitates it, usually the legs go back to normal. But we want to avoid that condition altogether in appropriately sizing the mealworms that you're going to feed. Don't feed anything larger than the space between the dragon's eyes. That way it'll fit comfortably down the dragon's throat and in the dragon's stomach and won't get clogged up in there and cause you some other issues. Also, feed appropriate numbers of these things. Don't allow a dragon that's only as long as the size of your thumb to sit there and eat 20 or 30 mealworms at a time. They simply throw it back up. That, I believe, is what's caused a lot of people to falsely assume that dragons can't eat mealworms, when in fact they can. They just have to simply be fed appropriately. Once again, same thing will happen with crickets occasionally, although it's not as likely because of the amount of energy that a dragon has to spend catching a cricket or a roach. Last but not least, we want to talk about impaction. One of the things that people say is, oh, if you feed your dragon mealworms, they're going to get impacted. I guarantee you, none of my bearded dragons has ever read that on a Facebook forum. I clean our dragons' cages. My daughter cleans our dragons' cages. Somebody in our crew cleans dragon cages at 9 a.m. every morning, and by 10 o'clock, our dragons who eat mealworms routinely will end up with a dirty cage. It does not cause impaction. Now, another thing about that outer layer that people are so concerned about that they claim causes impaction is actually a form of fiber. So instead of causing impaction, it actually causes your bearded dragon to go to the bathroom more regularly. Now, if the rumor was true that bearded dragons will be impacted from eating mealworms, our bearded dragons should poop once a week. Our dragons usually poop 2-3 times a day, and we believe it is because of the use of mealworms and the fiber that is contained in the outer shell. Since you now know that mealworms do not cause impaction, why is it that so many people seem to have an issue with impaction in bearded dragons? First of all, I believe it's because most bearded dragons simply do not get enough water. A dehydrated bearded dragon can sometimes lead to impaction. If you're feeding your dragon an all insect diet, they're probably not going to get enough fiber to be regular. Bearded dragons, especially adults, need good green leafy vegetables like mustards, collards, kale, not lettuce, but those leafy green vegetables have fiber in them that will also help your dragon to be regular. But apart from that, you need to be spraying those down. If your dragon becomes dehydrated, then your likelihood for impaction is going to increase. Now, they do get a little bit of moisture from their insects, but the vast majority of moisture is going to come from those vegetables. It's going to come from you taking a spray bottle and spraying down the vegetables. Now, the question is probably going to be, well, what if I get a dragon that doesn't eat vegetables? That is one of the primary reasons why we here at Cold Blood Creations do not sell a bearded dragon until it's at least 8 to 9 weeks old, because we want to ensure that our dragons are eating their vegetables so that we don't pass that problem along to you, our customer. So make sure that you're buying your dragons from a credible source that's taking the time to ensure that those dragons are feeding appropriately. It's up to you once you get the dragon that you continue to feed more and more vegetable matter as they get older. But once again, don't be afraid to include a little bit of protein in even the diet of an adult bearded dragon, even if it comes in the form of mealworms. So guys, I hope this takes care of some of the questions, some of the controversy. Once again, we thank you for watching Cold Blood Creations. You guys have a great weekend. I want you to misread what I said. Don't want as a part of the insects in your bearded dragon's stuff. And anybody that wants to come here and watch our dragons any day of the week and see how many times these guys crap, put you on some cleaning gloves and come on down.